Hey, good morning. Good old Mr. Costanza, always giving us good advice. Welcome here. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Rod. Really glad you've decided to take a little time out of your week to join us here at the meeting place this morning. Maybe you've been following along during our series online. Maybe you've been here. Maybe it's your first day. Welcome wherever you're coming from. We have covered a lot of ground over the past few weeks since the beginning of the year, exploring the 12 steps. And like Jonathan said, today we're on step 6 and 7, but we started out way back in step 1, filling in a blank. Filling in the blank personally for us, whatever the compulsion was, whatever the dependency or behavior was that kept on tripping us up and making life unmanageable. And we talked about that and we tried to identify that. And then we rolled into step 3 with its surrender to the God of our understanding. Big step. We say, God, I'm placing my will and my life in your hands. Last week, step 5, sharing the true nature of our faults and our wrongs with God and on other human beings, confession. That's a big step. And after you do that, you finally come to a place in your life where you lay it all out and you're honest about your junk, your resentments, your fears, your guilt feelings. It's like, whoo, serenity now. Right. Except for you wake up the next morning and the same negative attitudes and behavior patterns just kind of bubble under the surface, threatening to pop up and take over, which brings us to step 6 and 7, which read like this. Step 6, we are entirely ready to have God remove all of our defects of character. And step 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. So I was thinking earlier this week, I thought, you know what? We've covered a lot. Last week, the confession, laying our junk out there, it's a big thing. 6 and 7 are going to be a bit lighter, a bit easier. Right. This talk isn't a big, heavy theological message, but it's personal. It's personal to every single one of us, right where we find ourselves at, right here, right now. It's about something that makes a very significant difference in our lives. In the 12-step literature, there's a word, an idea that shows up over and over again in these 2 steps. The word is humility. I was talking with a friend of mine recently about humility. We were discussing what it is and what it isn't. We ride motorcycles together quite a bit, and afterwards he sent me a picture that he said, signified humility. I don't know if it signifies humility. There's something odd about that picture, but humility. There's a definition of humility that comes from the 12 steps, and it goes like this. Humility is the ability to accept things as they are, and when we cannot change them, and to seek God's help changing the things we can. I think that's a good definition. Sometimes I think we confuse humility with self-pity. We picture Eeyore, the donkey from Winnie the Pooh, moping around, sorry for himself. Woe, it's me, I'm so useless. I'm so full of negativity towards myself. Pay no attention to little old me. That's not humility. That's self-pity. And self-pity is not a healthy thing at all. Humility is an attitude. It's a choice. It's a choice to look at yourself and look at the world in a way that is honest, in a way that is realistic. And in step 6 and 7, we discover that humility is a key. It's a key that opens a door to freedom. When you read the Gospels, the biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament, you read these stories how Jesus would walk around and he encountered a lot of sick people, and he would often ask them a question. And the question at first seems kind of strange. He would say, "What do you want me to do for you?" And so in one story, he encounters a blind man and asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" In another story, a lame person, what do you want me to do for you? Kind of a funny question when you look at it. Their condition was obvious. Of course, blind man wanted to see, to walk. But Jesus asked, what do you want me to do for you? It's a very important question. He was asking, are you really ready to be well? Are you prepared for what that would mean for you in your day-to-day life? To not be this way anymore. Big question, big question. It's the question that's asked of us in steps 6 and 7. What is that particular behavior, that aspect of your character that you long to be free of, that character trait that's always bubbling under the surface, that you struggle with, that robs you of your peace of mind, that makes you act in unhealthy, unhelpful ways, sometimes in insane ways? I don't know what it is for you. It can be all kinds of things. Maybe it's impulsiveness. Acting or talking before thinking, and you look back over your life and you see how often that has got you into trouble. Maybe it's envy. For you, you find yourself driven by wanting what other people have. Maybe it's people pleasing or being phony, pretending. Maybe it's criticism. You just naturally tend to focus on the flaws in any given situation or in people around you. Maybe it's dishonesty or deception, this thing you keep falling into. It's so easy to lie. Maybe sarcasm, perfectionism, angry outbursts. It goes on and on. Whatever that unique thing is for us that we have identified through steps 1 through 5 that keeps resurfacing and sabotaging our lives. What do you want me to do for you? Throughout this series, we have tried as pastors up here speaking, be honest with our own struggles. And I've shared with you some of my struggles. One of them is that I'm a recovering know-it-all. One of my character defects is self-righteousness. There's this pattern of behavior in my life that shows up over and over again. It started way back when I was a kid, where I experienced this compulsive need to be right in conversation, to argue with people and to win at my arguments, no matter how trivial or silly they have been. And I've shared some of the damage that's caused for me in my relationships with my family. And the only relief that I've been able to find that has led to any peace of mind and freedom from this compulsive need to be right is by asking God to remove this defect of character from me and continuing to pray that prayer over and over again. And lately, I don't know, I haven't found it easy. With all of the ugly political rhetoric that somehow seems to have just bubbled to the surface lately, I find myself constantly having to check myself, particularly around relatives, extended family. I'm about to go to some event and I'm like, God, you got to help me. I don't want to get into arguments. I pray about that. And I ask for the strength to be tolerant, accepting, seeking to understand why people believe what they believe and not judging them. I have to pray that I would be gentle with my words, or else I'm not. It's a daily struggle because self-righteousness is one of my defects of character. And the only relief that comes in choosing humility. Choosing an attitude right here between these two ears of mine that says, sure, I have an opinion, but it's just an opinion, and I don't know everything. Rod, maybe listen instead of talk. This is choosing an attitude. Seek to understand instead of be understood. Be tolerant of people who have a different opinion than I do, knowing they have come to those opinions for sometimes deeply personal and meaningful reasons that I don't know. Right? Just like I've come to my opinions for those personal reasons. And just taking a breath and going, okay, God, help me with this. Help me with this. Humility. Simple. Right? Yeah. A few years ago, I actually read something, and I saw a guy present this, and I read some articles about it that actually helped me to understand humility a little bit. I'm going to share it with you. I hope it helps you. It's kind of an interesting thought experiment. So it goes like this. Picture, if you will, or imagine the whole universe. I know it's like impossible, right? For us to even comprehend. But for a moment, imagine you could. The entire universe and everything in it. Here's a cheesy depiction. Maybe it looks like this, okay? So, the circle around the entire universe, that circle represents all the information, all the knowledge in the universe. Everything knowable. Everything. The size and location of every planet, every atom, the composition of every genome, every strand of DNA in the entire universe. Well, we know, science tells us that around 4% of the universe is what they call known substance, meaning like about 96% is something they call dark matter or dark energy. We don't know what that is. Quantum mechanics in physics tells us that there are at least 11 dimensions in the universe, 7 of which we can't experience. In just the oceans on our planet, we have explored less than 10% of them, and there are millions of undiscovered species just in our tiny oceans. All that stuff, and way more, is within that circle. So here's the exercise. Take a pencil and draw a circle that you think represents the grand total of all human knowledge about the universe. Honestly, how big would you draw that circle? Not very big, right? I mean, would you be able to see the dot? Take it one step further. Inside that circle you just drew, of the total cumulative knowledge of all the human beings who have ever lived, all the PhDs and physicists and astrophysicists and everything, all the chemistry and biology and all those things that we've ever as human beings figured out, draw another dot representing what you yourself know. Yeah. Could you even see that? When you look at yourself and what you know in honest relation to this great universe we find ourselves in, you realize something. We exist in a world of unfathomably divine mystery and beauty that we as individuals know next to nothing about. Acknowledging the size of the tiny dot of our own personal knowledge and ability is a good starting place for humility. There's far more that we don't know than what we do know. We aren't able to figure this life out alone. Your stuff starts to make sense. Humility gives us the ability to acknowledge and accept things in this universe that we cannot control. And humility is the essential ingredient that opens us up to God's help so that we are able to change the things we can. I learned something that I found kind of interesting earlier this week. In the earliest days of AA, of Alcoholics Anonymous, step 7 had a tiny phrase added to it. Today, step 7 goes like this: humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. But the step originally read, humbly on our knees ask God to remove our shortcomings. Now, the on our knees part is obviously not crucial, but I think it gives us a picture of the humility that this step truly requires. Over the years, I have talked with a lot of people. I've heard a lot of stories of recovery, and time again, I've noticed that from those who are thriving in recovery, from those who are actually living life and enjoying sobriety, as opposed to just surviving. I've heard them say that they actually physically do this every day. At some point, first thing in the morning or late at night, both sometimes, they kneel and humbly ask God for help with their character defects. Many of those people are people whom I consider to be close friends. And their stories are not my stories to tell. But thinking about this, I remembered something quite distinctively about my own life in regards to all of this. My story is I became interested in Jesus and what Jesus is all about at age 21. Before that, I just lived for having fun, basically. I was one of those kids who loved high school, loved it, loved college, loved it, loved every dead-end job that I took because there were opportunities to meet people and to get in with a different crowd, but mostly that crowd was sort of the same crowd. It was the party crowd. And somehow, in all of that, I became really comfortable with using extremely colorful language, let's just say. I would tend to gravitate towards people who cursed a lot because, what I know now, swearing is a form of social bonding, right? It really is. It really is. And I used colorful language instinctively. I didn't even think about it. It was just a way of speaking and a way of carrying myself. It felt like independence, a little bit of rebellion sometimes. It was like my thing. So I'm 21 years old. I'm running into these people. I'm reading a lot. I meet a bunch of people who are Christians on the road, and I was backpacking at the time, hitchhiking and stuff. And one of the things I was attracted to was this possibility of living with more serenity and more calm in my life. I was kind of trying to frame this somehow. I was constantly driven to find new adventures and new conquests and new fun, crazy things. I never had any peace, and I recognized that as part of myself. And I just came to a point where I wanted some more calm. I wanted some more peace of mind, and somehow dropping F-bombs made my life and relationships feel less calm, and more abrasive or something. And it didn't help to, foster serenity and peace of mind. And so I just decided I was going to try to stop swearing so much, and choose more creative ways to communicate. And you know what? I remember I didn't have much success at all. At the time, like I said, I was traveling around, backpacking and stuff, and so the people I hung around with didn't seem to, care what kind of language you use. But that started not to matter to me anymore. I cared. And I came to the point where I felt trapped. I felt stuck, and it annoyed me. It bugged me that I wanted to quit this habit, and I simply couldn't. I couldn't, even though I wanted to. You know what that feeling, right? You come to those places in your life. So what hit me when I read this older version, or this AA version of Step 7, where it says, humbly on our knees, I remember this time when I did that. It was kneeling by my bed. I was in Indonesia. It was this little cot. And I remember praying. I said, God, take this habit. I'm surrendering this habit of mine. I can't seem to stop it. Just here, I prayed, and I prayed that way for a few days in a row. And a funny thing happened. I want to say I started to catch myself more often when I spoke, but it was actually more like I was being tapped on the shoulder and offered a different choice in the moment. In the past, I would always go this way, and that was almost like, you don't have to go that way anymore. You can now make a different choice. Here it is. And different words started coming out of my mouth. And the more I paid attention to those little nudges, those little taps on the shoulder from God, the more my whole way of thinking and speaking changed. But it required a constant attitude of humility, because it's so easy to slip back into a pattern of behavior that you have adopted and unquestioningly followed for so incredibly long. And guess what? It's still a thing Believe it or not, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I've completely conquered it. I speak perfectly all the time. And you know what? This week, it snowed a lot. My truck got stuck at one point. And, I get to this point where I'm like, no, you don't want to be saying that in your head, because the next thing you know, it'll be coming out your mouth. So stop saying that in your head. Thank you, right? You just have an attitude of humility. It's constant, it never ends. There's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, pride ends in a fall. The opposite of humility ends in a fall. Humility, however, brings honor, lifts you up out of the fall. A constant attitude of humility is the key that releases us from fear. What is the fear? The fear of the fall. The fall that happens when our character defects take over. When things like selfishness or blaming others or impulsiveness, gossiping, impatience, whatever it is that we have identified through the first few steps, takes over again. Back in history, there was a man named Paul. We talk about him a lot. He wrote a whole bunch of letters right around the early years where after Jesus' death and resurrection. And we have them compiled in a book called the New Testament. A lot of those letters are saved for us, and we can read them, which is kind of neat. And some of those letters, this man named Paul talks about his experience with Jesus Christ, freeing him from particular character defects, which for Paul showed up as things like selfishness. He wrote about struggling with that. Pride was a big one for him. He writes about struggling with his sense of entitlement based on his ethnicity and his background. Violence was a thing for him. It was like a default thing. Amongst other things, he wrote about that. And here's what he wrote in one of his letters to some of his friends who were living at the time in the city of Rome. He wrote this: "For by the grace given to me by God, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment." It's the starting point. It's the starting point for living free. When it comes to steps 6 and 7, I have never met anyone who has said to me, once they started praying about their character defects, surrendering their character defects to God, they were all removed instantly, forever. I'm not saying that can't happen. I don't want to put any kind of limit on that. I just haven't met anybody like that, and that's not my experience. What it looks like most often is that when we choose humility moment by moment, when we trust enough to place our lives in the loving hands of God that we see extended to us when we look at Jesus Christ, He gently, He graciously leads us one step at a time, one day at a time, one moment at a time, awakening us to the power of His grace. His grace that is present in every moment of our lives, that enables us to choose a different, better response, a new way of living grounded in unconditional love, God's unconditional love for us, and His boundless grace. His grace that covers our past mistakes. All those times, all those tapes you can play in the past of the times your character defects have overruled and ruined things for you. His grace covers those. Covers them. In the moment right now, His grace flows into us if we're open to it and enables us to make a different decision, knowing He never leaves us. He's right here with us, right here with you. And that carries on into the future where we will never be alone. So, give yourselves humbly to God, wrote James, the brother of Jesus. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. And when you draw close to God, listen to this, when you draw close to God, God will draw close to you. Would you join me as we pray a little bit through this? God, we ask that you would help us. It's the most basic prayer that anyone can pray. Help me. We've prayed it throughout this series. Help us. Help us to be honest. Help me to be honest and to adopt, an attitude of humility, knowing that I don't know everything. I don't understand everything. I'm not the greatest intelligence in the universe. That's quite obvious. Help me to be honest with myself. And I pray that you would help us to be honest about these patterns of behaving and these character defects that we all have, that we long to be free of. And we ask that you would take from us today, in this moment, right now, those defects of character that prevent us from growing and healing and being of help to others. Thank you for your limitless, unconditional love and your abounding grace, and that you are always with us and we're never alone. And we pray the prayer of this passage, draw near to us, God, as we draw near to you. Amen.